Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Welcome once again to the Inspired Challenge podcast. And the reason we're saying once again is because we were just notified that we did not have audio for about the past 10 minutes of us talking.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed watching our beautiful faces for this time. Now, unfortunately, you have to hear our voices.
Indeed. Oh my goodness. And now I've got audio playing over here. This is the problem of going live.
We are awash with technical difficulties on this morning.
So, all right. What we were doing, we had some conversation, but we were jumping into...
Some conversation that will now be lost to history.
Lost to history. We were actually about to start talking about my boy Ben. Ben runs his own podcast called Benny's Big Talk. And he has had a sleuth of success already where he's managed to have a viral piece.
Whoa!
That's been able to strike nearly 250,000 views.
250,000 very angry people. Yes. That's, not entirely, no. Yeah, so I started podcasting about a month ago, mostly because two people told me I should, and as with the lack of positive reinforcement that many men get in this world today, two people saying that you're good enough but talking that you should do something like that is enough to make you spend thousands of dollars and then put quite a bit of effort into it. I began the podcast. It's called Benny's Big Talk, and it's basically a couple people, sitting in comfy chairs trying to solve all the world's problems just through great conversations. We do a mixture of, philosophy, culture, history, politics, music, and personal issues, anything that people are greatly passionate about. And we also do a jam cast at the end. So I'm a musician, and we have people on, and anyone who can play an instrument, maybe even just like shake a tambourine or something, all the way towards, virtuosos, whatever. We jam. We do like an impromptu jam session afterwards. And that's good. I think that's pretty unique. I don't know many other people who do a jam session on their podcast, so.
100%. And the man knows how to get down, y'all. He played professionally with several bands for most of his early to mid 20s. Mm-hmm. And then he got into the regular world of like engineering and whatnot. Yeah. And I
got a day job, went straight. Yeah.
Yeah, dude is killing it. He's killing it. So for those of you who are interested in what you might hear today, we did an episode previously. I came on his show, and that's where we made that piece happen at. So
we did, yeah. It was all thanks to Wes and his wonderful facial expressions and the reactions that made that clip what it was. And it was a very... I understand why it elicited some controversy. I mean, it was an interesting clip. It was a historical story, which may or may not be true, but we shared it out of interest, and because I think it's always great to get people talking and reading about history. And it was a story about Marcus Aurelius, who was a Roman emperor and one of the figures most commonly associated with Stoic philosophy in today's world. And yeah, it was a story about him and a sort of blood sacrifice with a sexual connotation from an ancient Roman source called the
Dark Stuff.
From a book called the Historia Augusta, which was a semi-apocryphal history of the Roman emperors. And so, boring history stuff aside, basically. I posted the clip, all right, and there was quite a lot of response. Generally people saw it as I was trying to smear the name of Marcus Aurelius, trying to tell a story that would then devalue the influence of Stoicism and what he taught, like that. But as a lover of Marcus Aurelius, as a follower of Stoicism as I am, I more shared it out of curiosity and interest because, especially in the context of taking history with a grain of salt when you read it, because when you read history, you are dealing with, especially 2,000-year-old history, you're dealing with the people who had very, very different morals, very, very different societal norms, and they acted in radically different ways, despite having the same flesh and bones, as we do. And so I think it's interesting to see that kind of rift that we have with people in the past who, were also hungry, tired, and had the same feelings that we do, but also they would react in dramatically different ways to things. And I think that it's always is pertinent when you read history and religious texts like the Bible to understand that they were written in another time and to incorporate that into your understanding. And it doesn't devalue them in any way. I think it's just something you have to understand when you're reading history, that you have to look at it through a lens. And and with this clip, it was a crazy clip, and and a lot of the response was how dare you say these things about my precious Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. But I would say that there is no story that should not be shared. There is no part of history that we should not discuss and learn from. And as someone who loves Stoicism, I think that even Marcus Aurelius would find it humorous. The kind of schism between, I think we should avoid falling prey to our emotions, whereas at the same time, there's this story about me, getting jealous of my wife and then, slaughtering a gladiator and then performing a sexual ritual with her afterwards, and then saying, wow, good thing I did not fall prey to my emotions on this day, So I think it's a great story in that respect, and I think that it started a great conversation, which I did enjoy. Despite my initial reservations on having a massive amount of negative feedback, which is something I've never experienced so much in my life, because I try and get along with everybody, even though I'm not afraid to share my opinions. I will say it was new to me, having the full brunt of the internet just thrust upon me in that moment, but I think ultimately it was a learning experience. So yeah.
So my man Vamps, the one that I told you that I have done the political shows with, that's who told us about the audio as well.
Thank you, guys.
He's on right now. He said, Stoicism. Hey, what a Chad. So he appreciated it. Also, this is the same guy that seeing his profile picture, I'm like, he looks so much like Ben. You guys have some differences, but you guys also have a lot of similarities in there. Very much so, man.
Long lost.
So let's go ahead and get straight into your soiree and how you ended up in the land of communism. Actual communism, not like person being like, "Oh, you're a communist."
My soiree. A soiree is a party, Devahntau. We're talking about, But
your whole party and fiesta of it.
So, all right. So, since you didn't hear, because we were doing a silent film earlier, Devahntau was throwing me under the bus massively initially in front of his audience and said, "First, this man is not a Christian," and then he said, "Not only is he not a Christian, but he is also a communist." Dun dun dun. And,
wait, I got that one. Hold on.
You got a sound effect for that? Let's hear it. Atheist, communist, devil worshiper.
Are you?
No.
Oh.
No, but I just assumed that was the next allegation that you would lay upon me. But no. So I mean, first off, just that first argument, non-Christian. I do not believe in a higher power, but I do align myself with many Christian principles, and I have great respect for a lot of what Christians do. All right, but I simply do not have the capacity for belief in something that I cannot empirically understand, and that may be a weakness on my part, but I don't find that it detracts from the quality of my life or my moral systems in any way. And so again, I'm not kind of a raging atheist. I think most of them are kind of unfounded in many of their critiques, and I think there's a lot of value to being religious, and hence why the majority of people are. And I think that when you have higher rates of atheism, I think that coincides with quite a lot of depression and mental illness, I think, and a lot of depravity, I think, And so, in general, although I cannot ascribe myself to a belief in God, I do respect that belief, and I don't think that it's not valuable. But on to the next thing, that I'm a communist, he says, But so
I just read the paper, guys.
And so I think that term sounds a little scary to people, especially which is crazy because we've kept that over from the McCarthy era of just fear over any opposing ideas to the system that's in which we live currently. But basically, I say that entirely from a polemic background, which is where I want to introduce the discussion that maybe our current economic system is not the ultimate, and there may be something better to increase the average of the health and human joy, and then maybe there's something that there should be priorities above profit in organizing a human society. All right, and so there are many failures of Communist Manifesto, of Das Kapital, but I think that what Karl Marx does is raise some very, very interesting questions about why systems are the way they are. And he was writing in the early, well, not the early age, but kind of the middle of the Industrial Revolution, when the machinery and what he would term as the means of production, right? So the machinery that was developing at the time was allowing people to produce things at a exponentially higher rate than ever before, and so the capitalist system really rose out of the increased ability for us to produce goods and to have an economy that was accelerating at an unheard of rate. And at that point, you had people who were concentrating power and concentrating means of production in their own businesses, and they were creating these monopolistic tendencies over their industries. And so basically one or two companies would then have an entire control over an entire industry. And this is something that is very difficult without government intervention to remove. And there were acts made in the late 19th century, early 20th century to help prevent monopolistic tendencies, until break up huge trusts, break up huge corporations, and prevent them from taking complete control over markets. But to this day, we remain and are increasingly so very, very in control. Very, very controlled by small amounts of companies, especially nowadays in the sphere of social media, where a few select companies control our public fora, the media through which that we communicate with each other. And so this is something that is very dangerous if you allow a private corporation to have complete control over our communications. And we've seen that in cases like I brought up in a recent episode of in Australia. There was a law that was passed in Australia that's made it so that Facebook would have to pay money to news corporations who are sharing media, all right, on Facebook websites, right? And Facebook was viewed this as financially, bad for them, right? And so what they did was, all right, is they shut off all access to the sharing of news on their platform in Australia, and they basically held the Australian government hostage and the Australian people's ability to share news, and until they modified that bill to say, we're going to give some more concessions to Facebook, and you can look that up as well in order to verify that. But essentially, what we had was a private corporation that had more power than a government, a state. It basically toppled a state in that moment and said that it had greater power than them and they could not control them. And they did in that case. They surrendered to the private company, which is a global company which has billions of people using its service. And that has put us into a state of which a guy I like to listen to a lot called Yanis Varoufakis says is a state of techno-feudalism that we've incorporated ourselves into. We've become, in a sense, almost like medieval serfs to these tech companies that own our entire spheres of communication, right? And we basically are paying rents to live in the world that they now own, create, right? Because there's less of a capitalist system because there's no competition in this sphere, really. And we don't have really any power in our labor anymore. What we have now is we have to pay rents to our digital overlords, who is now Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, the rulers of all these social media companies, in order to exist in the public space, right? And then we pay into this with content, like what we're doing right now. We are putting content onto YouTube for free, which is then going to enrich their platform with capital, right? And we are giving our labor power to this company to give it free capital for it to then enrich itself with. And we, unless you're getting millions of dollars from this that I'm not aware of, are not really enriching ourselves, with the power of our labor. And this is something that Karl Marx enumerated in Das Kapital, is that workers have tremendous difficulty in exercising and profiting from their own labor power, and they need to advocate for it. But it is difficult because all you own is your labor power, but you need to exist in a system that has means of production in order for you to apply your labor power to something that is then profitable. And the capitalists, what they do is they provide the means of production and the capital in order for you to then apply your labor power to create profit, right? And they, of course, will then take the profits, and you're paid a small amount for your contribution to that process. But what we have now is a system where we have no way of advocating for our own labor power, all right? And we are now producing free content, all right, free capital for massive companies to enrich themselves, and we're not benefiting from it. We are in a small way, but we think we are because we're given the illusion that the work that we're doing has monetary value, but in really, we're paid back in the illusion that what we're doing has value. In reality, we're just kind of twisting in the wind,
So you.
That was a lot. Sorry.
You became a communist because
I did not become a communist, Devahntau, right? We're going to definitely have a comment. I'm not a communist, all right? What I'm saying is that there are valid critiques, all right, to our current system, which is not even capitalistic really in origin. Capitalism is essentially dead, all right? We are now paying rent to feudal lords, all right? And that system completely changed in the last 20 or 30 years with the rise of the internet, all right, and the rise of techno-capital. All right, so I'm not saying that I'm a communist, all right?
Okay, so you're not an actual communist.
No, but also, all right, we shouldn't view these kind of things with such stigma, right? I think that most people in their perspectives of a lot of these buzzwords from the 20th century, communists, fascists, for one, they have no idea what they mean. They have no idea the historical contents of what they're saying, critiquing, or espousing. And they're forgetting that there are some valid ideas to be found in history.
Question for you.
Of course.
Do you think that the accuracy of a word and how it's used and applied matters or not so much?
It matters completely, absolutely.
So in terms of things like people who have been... the typical media thing where people are like, Trump is a Nazi, Musk did like the Sieg Heil salute. Mm-hmm. Do you find those things accurate or misused?
I think that they are misused and there's some validity to them, but there is much misinformation in it. And I'm not going to say misinformation, I hate that word, but there's a misapprehension of what those words mean. Mm-hmm. As far as Elon Musk and the salute, I think he was doing the apocryphal and fallacious Roman salute. I think there was no Roman salutes that was like this, but there is a painting from. I believe his name is Jacques-Louis David, a painting from the 19th century called The Oath of the Horatii, and that is where the salute comes from, but there's no evidence of a Roman salute in that sense, so, but I believe he was probably referring to that, and there's obviously, as men, we think about the Roman Empire at least once a day, at least I do. Well, for me, actually, it's kind of constant. It's probably once every 15 seconds or something, but I think it's a apocryphal reference to ancient Rome. I don't think that it's a reference to the Nazi salute, but who knows? However, I will say that there are parallels to be made between Trump's populism and the rise of fascism, but I think that we're looking at the wrong sorts of thing. I think people typically they look at it from the base level of they see a persecution of illegal immigrants coming over the border, and they view that from a racial sense, and they view it as equal to the persecution and eventual extermination of Jews under the Nazis. Mm-hmm. But I think that the parallels to be found with fascism and Trump are a lot more in the origins of Hitler and the Nazi Party, much less in what actually happens in the war eventually. And you can see how people fall victim to populist ideology and how they can be so very quickly inflamed and then brought to great fervor, in response to that ideology with themes of nationalism, with themes of a common feeling of like vengeance,
like losing ground of like your home state.
So yeah, and I'll do a quick discussion of this topic because I know no one wants to hear about history forever, but it's important to have some background in terms of I'll do a very, very quick explanation of why World War II happened, why the Nazis happened, and how it parallels to Trump, right? So the reason why Hitler hated the Jews, all right? He was a soldier in World War I. And during World War I, on the home front in Germany, there were a number of revolutionary movements going on, and they were many people in these revolutionary movements were from intellectual Jewish populations, right? And they were trying to change things in Germany, move towards socialism, move towards a change from the imperialist system that had existed at the time. And so Hitler and many Germans, they had this theory of the stab in the back theory, right? So they believed that while they were fighting the war, that at home, that's these what they believed to be predominantly Jewish revolutionaries were making things unstable at home, right? And so they believed they lost the World War I because of the Jews, right? And so he kept this hatred over the next 20 years, and he used it as the foundation of his belief that Germany needs to be brought back to its power as a great world power, which it had lost when it lost World War I, because the West put this treaty on them called the Treaty of Versailles, which basically made them pay an insane amount of money, because they said they were responsible for starting the war, which is not really true, but they put the blame on them. So this debt crippled all of Germany. Right, crippled them for 20 years, and they created this very weak thing called the Weimar Republic. They had massive hyperinflation. And then, so when Germany was in a state of massive economic depression, the Nazis were able to blame the Jews for this economic depression. Right, and this allowed them also to create nationalist fervor in saying we were made weak by the Western powers, we were made weak by the Jews, and so they used this as a scapegoat. Right, and then they said we will bring back Germany to being a great world power, and that was the theory. And he did to some extent. They created a bubble through war manufacturing, and there was a brief upturn. But then, of course, he started World War II, and they were spread thin very quickly, and they started massacring people in massive amounts in an extermination efforts. And so, basically, what you had was a populist uprising, which was founded in a feeling of national shame and misplaced hatred, right, that led to great violence. And the parallels you can see with that in Trump is that people feel like America has lost its position as what it used to be viewed as was like the greatest power in the world amongst Americans, right? And they feel that they've been shortchanged and they can't trust their government, right? And there's a number of valid reasons why they feel that, right? And economically, there's been some shifts in the industries and technology where people feel like they're losing their jobs, and they also feel like to some extent that immigrants are a part of this problem, and that is how you can parallel it to, well, they're trying to scapegoat them in this case, you know? And so there are some valid parallels for sure, but at the same time, I would say that we misuse that term because we look at fascism simply through the lens of hatred and racism, and we don't look at it as through a real sense, which is it's just a social, it's a degree of government control and socialism mixed with a sense of nationalism, which is literally just national socialism, all right? And that's where the term comes from. You could argue that China today is much more fascist than they are communists. The communism is just kind of a label they put on it, all right? But in actuality, China is manifestly fascist, right?
Yeah. And I would agree, like 100%. Are there parallels? Of course, there's some parallels, you know. Yeah. But I think you could find throughout several administrations throughout the past few of them that there are certain measures that people have taken that people would say, that was wildly fascist or that. And so I find that the common use of it is just you know, and this is the same spirit that I have when we look at conservatives who will constantly, he's a communist, he's a radical leftist. People thought that Kamala Harris was like the most left thing in the world, and really she's like
insane
a
because
centrist.
She's a neoconservative and honestly center right. You know, I mean, the most left leaning person we've had that has become a major figure in mainstream politics recently is Bernie Sanders, and even Bernie Sanders is basically center left. All right, and Bernie Sanders is much more akin to his goals are really something very unradical, something akin to what was established in Scandinavia in the 1960s. You know, basically, which is proven to be a very successful system that many people love, and there's high degrees of happiness and satisfaction in those countries. You know,
I want to real quick. So you with this idea of what is the shift that when you look at it, you're like, okay, I not go communism, but I want to see these significant changes, departed from what we are, what our current system
Right.
is.
So in the United States, our primary directive is profit making. All right. And you put that positively in the lens of the American dream of grinding, of, success through pulling yourself up through your bootstraps. And there is some value to that. I appreciate the notions of hard work that we espouse in the United States, and self-improvement. But a lot of it is given to you as a way of allowing you as a worker to cope with the fact that you are never going to attain wealth and capital in the sense that's the true capitalist will. You think that you are a capitalist when you're participating in a capitalist system, but the vast majority of people in a capitalist system are workers and not capitalists, all right? And you're going to be continuously exploited by them for profits, and you may profit small amounts in this case. And there are absolutely valid ways to be an entrepreneur, be very successful in the United States, and it is not a bad system, all right? In general, we have lifted up the poorest people. All right, and with capitalism, everyone gets lifted up. It's just that some get lifted up to a massive disproportionate degree. All right, and that is not something that you can avoid. There's going to be inequality in every system. All right, so that's just natural. But what we do not prioritize in the United States is human life, human happiness, all right, and the human experience. All right, we get on average 2 weeks a year of PTO, and that is insane. All right, healthcare is something that is very expensive. It is almost always tied to your job for most people, and is very difficult to get access to, and is often insufficient. Even though we have a lot of great medical research here, which is due to profit making. So then again, we have to establish that there are. It is a great issue, and for me, I look at the life of many people in Europe these days, and I think that though there are weaknesses to the system that they have in Europe, such as there's much fewer protections on free speech. I think that is a definite weakness of the EU, but in general, people live happier lives. They have more time for themselves, and the food is safer because there's laws there that protect, the origins and the constituent components of food that keep people from being infected with artificial ingredients in their food that do not need to be there.
Because really and truly, a lot of the mishealth that we have right now is due to profit margins and being able to reproduce these things at such a volume that you have to end up taking shortcuts in order to get the product to be able to turn out either faster, or you have to simply take the product earlier before full development and add in things that allow it to have that same kind of taste, which ultimately degrades the quality of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like they start with a loaf of bread and they think, okay, so normally a loaf of bread lasts for a couple days, max. It's really only fresh for like a day or two max, and then after that it's stale. And they think, well, this is not feasible for mass scale and distribution, and so we need to start putting preservatives into it. And when you put preservatives into it, they then degrade the quality of it, and then you have to put in other chemicals to bring the quality back to an acceptable standard in a way that kind of simulates what bread is supposed to be like. So what you have is something that ceased to be bread long ago, and especially when bread that is shelf stable for months, like that is not bread. You're eating chemicals, that are in the shape of bread, or what the idea of what bread should be, and in no uncertain terms is poisonous, and you may not see it in the short term, but overall, it is absolutely horrible for us to be consuming these foods. And in most parts, not most parts, but in Europe, most of the preservatives and artificial ingredients that go into our food in the United States, those are illegal there, all right? And you cannot produce food like that, or you can't sell food like that there. And so people eat fresh bread from fresh bakeries on the corner, all right? So, they eat real food. And when you go there, all of a sudden, a lot of your health problems start going away because all of a sudden you're eating real food. Crazy, And for me, the value of human life, especially as a person with a tremendous amount of health problems, for me, that's more important than profits. I like to make money, and I do make money, and I value the fact that I make a pretty high wage relative to what I would make in Europe because I live in the United States. But if at the end of the day I'm being poisoned, all right, And if I have no time for myself, for my family, then what is the point of this constant profit seeking if we can't benefit from it? You know, and for me, I think that the culture of the American work culture needs to change, and our food production system needs to change. And the only way to do this really is through a social control. All right, you know, and so you'd like to think that the market will make this happen, but the market does have by itself, it does produce many good outcomes, and oftentimes it can increase the quality of goods, increase the quality of life naturally through its own forces, through self-interest. But sometimes it does not. Sometimes it creates things like Wonder Bread, all right? And so, you know, in that case, you need to have a public authority which is created and maintained through the consent of the governed. To be fair, we're not talking about an authoritarian state. What we're talking about is a collective institution that espouses the same values of its constituent citizens, right, and works for those citizens, all right? And that was the theory originally behind the United States, a government by the people for the people, all right? But now that government is completely and totally infected by the lobbying of major industries, all right? And as long as we allow money in politics, we're never going to have a complete and enjoyable human life in this country, because our goals are secondary to profits in every case. And if we are allowed to live a good life, that is merely as a byproduct of it and not force of it.
So I wanna make a statement of why I think that it is completely impossible that we'll ever get to a point where the U.S. is looking at things from a more social standpoint.
Okay.
So my thought is that because the U.S. values so much things like, first of all, the hyper-individualistic mentality that we have. One is that. Two is the idea that it's more important to look at your life, like each individual experience, rather than the collective good in any format, and to optimize for each individual person. And three, because of a lack of value of the next generation of the U.S. And I think that that combination of elements makes it impossible that system could ever work here. I think we have an overall lack of values that is growing at a certain rate, and that without the introduction of more religion into it, that those systems will never work.
So you're saying that Jesus is a communist is what you're saying?
I'm saying the people who would like to strive closer to that, I think that they have really good intentions, but it would take essentially a complete system overhaul in there.
And that's the thing.
And also, if you want to discuss Jesus as a communist, we can do that as well. So,
but yeah. So as long as we're talking about politics at the moment, so we'll continue with that. So you talk about the rugged individualistic attitude of people in the United States, and that is something that comes from our frontier origins, you know, and from as our revolutionary origins, you know, and so that is maintained. I think that's a valuable thing. You know, I think that's our First Amendment rights, our Second Amendment rights are incredibly important, all right? And these are things that I would never, ever want to change, all right? But if you take individualism to its logical conclusion, you have anarcho-capitalism, all right? You have me in my fortress with my M1 Abrams tank, all right? And you on the other side trying to attack my home, and me using the tank against you, all right? And if you have any disputes, you settle them through arbitration, and basically it's every man for himself. And that's the logical conclusion of that. But we must realize that we do not live, and we cannot live in that system, because it is anarchy, and it's definitive anarchy, and basically many people will die all the time, right? And yes, it sounds nice because you can grow your own crops and you can protect your own family, and that's great. But but generally, if we would like to live next to other people, because there's a tremendous amount of benefits of living next to other people, as we find, and most people enjoy living in cities because of that, we have to agree upon a few rules, and we have to then legislate based on, to some extent, the collective over the individual, all right? Because we have signed a social contract that, because we choose to live in a society, that we then have to create a collective understanding that we're going to follow by certain rules, and we have to, in some ways, suppress our individualistic desires in order to support us collectively. All right, and this is something that you cannot have a large community of humans without taking into account. All right, and so individualism is valuable. And I think it's a great part of our national spirit, and I think that's a great part of what made America great. Maybe it was going to make America great again or whatever, But it's not something that we should leave behind. But we have to realize that we also have a duty to collective unity, right, and to our other people. And I think that we also have a great nationalistic feeling as Americans, regardless of what we look like or where we come from. If we have the idea that we espouse American principles and values, right, that we are together American, right, and there is unity there, and that is nationalism, all right, and that sounds scary because when you hear nationalism, you think Hitler, all right, but that's a failure, all right, because there are great values to nationalism, and we see that. Although there's some terrible things in it, also we see great value to it in China.
And I would even make the case that a person, it's not even nationalism in general that people have an issue with, but specifically it's the connotation of the specific white nationalism, because white nationalism is the one where there's the connotation of like white people are the most superior, like the master race, like all of the races. Well, especially black people are like inferior. Asians might be a little bit higher on there. Like
why are Asians higher in there?
It all comes down to, I believe the name was Kellogg. There was a person who did a study, and this was back in like 1993 to 1995, something in there. And this study basically shows that if you took like a group of white people, you took black people, Hispanics, Asians, you found that Asian people had the largest brain in terms of full volume. You had white.
Wait. We're talking about brain size. We're talking about phrenology now. This is some old style racism.
Oh yeah,
what are we talking about 100%. Here, man?
This is the basis of it. So Asians are number one in brain size. Number two is white people. Number three is Hispanic people, which are slightly below white people, and then black people.
Wait. That doesn't make any sense, all right? Because Hispanics are just a mixture of Asian and European peoples.
Yeah, I don't know.
Wait, are you saying that as a black person you have a smaller brain than me?
I'm saying that's what this study would imply. That's what that's the basis of it. And that is the talking point that figures like Mr. Nicky F uses, and sort of that branch of the hyper white nationalistic side of it. So those are the connotations of white nationalism.
I mean, there's a lot of racist origins of racism, but like I just said racism, or I just said racist origins of racism. So that's not a very interesting thing to say. But what I'm saying is there's a lot of people who try and put a scientific basis to racism, and that was a big movement in the 1800s where they tried to point to things like the size and shape of the skull, and they said like, Africans have a smaller frontal cortex, so they have less capacity for reason, other ridiculous things like that. So, in terms of white nationalism, I think that you have nationalism for one is for, we're talking about the nation of America, all right? And that's what we have nationalism, right, for, at least, that's what I'm talking about in this case. In terms of, I think, all right, and this may be a polemic thing, but I think it's perfectly valid to be proud of being not necessarily white, but being European. Like, I'm proud of the achievements of European people, in terms of architecture, law, history, and the things that the Romans, that the Greeks, that Germanic peoples, that the English did, all my ancestors, I'm proud of that. I don't think it's anything to do with the way you look, but it absolutely has to do with your ancestors. And I think that it's unfortunate that many people feel like they can't be proud of being European because of the association with white nationalism or some bullshit like that. So I didn't mean to say to curse, but I think if you are European and you know your history, you should absolutely be proud of that, because like many other peoples of the world, we've done great things, and you should be proud of your ancestry, That's all I'll say about that. But
so let's go to Jesus as a communist.
Hell yeah, let's do it. Or heck yeah, my apologies. All right.
So
actually, wait a second. How about Jesus as an atheist?
As an atheist.
I want to start there.
Really?
I'm going to start there.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. So I brought this up in last podcast I did, but so I points to and this is something that has its origins in Hegel, in philosophy. It's not something that comes from Christian theology. It's more from an interpretation of Christian theology. And obviously, I'm not trying to pretend this is the way Christians view about their own God. But this is how I as an atheist tries to see it through a lens that I understand, all right, and tries to see the value of it, because I do think there's tremendous value in it. But so basically, all right, when Jesus is nailed on the cross, all right, and at that moment he is human and he is alone, and he yells out to God. He says, "Why have you forsaken me?" Right, And in this moment, God does not respond to him, right? So at this moment, he's alone and he's human, all right. And in this moment, I believe I don't believe anything, but I am positing, all right, that God became an atheist in this moment, and that God ceased to exist as a higher power, as an intelligence being who designed the earth. And then when Jesus died on the cross, he became the kind of like a manifestation of the love and connection we have between humans. And that's why we can't see God, or in the world today. I mean, it's not manifesting itself, at least in terms of what I can see, all right? And in a way I think this allows you to view the validity and value of God without having to accept that there's some kind of magical, best friend in the sky, and see it more as there is something within us, a power within us that is manifested in our connections, right, and the love between us, and the beautiful things we can create in our oneness that is greater than just what animals have, right? And that is what you can call God. And also that comes from, it connects to the sense of the Stoic physics, like I talked about on my podcast, which is where God is the logos, and this intangible oneness with the world, and the motions of the rivers flowing, the birds flying, everything works with emotion, which is natural, and God is in that essence, and among everything, and which is also something that Berg Spinoza posited, this idea that God is this connective tissue that brings us all together. And that is something that I can espouse, because I'm not gonna say it makes logical sense, because it's just a metaphysical theory, but it's something that I can align with, because it shows us that there is value in our connections, right? That's the things that value us as humans together is something that we should value over things that separate us, that cause disunion and decay. But and I think that is something I can get behind.
So essentially, your theory for it is basically like, it's New Age thought, essentially.
I wouldn't say it's New Age, but I mean, in a sense,
because that's the basis of it. Is that, and that's what New Age ends up being. Is that God is within us. God is everything around us. God is love. Love is God. And
no, Shrek is love.
Everything.
Shrek is life.
So yeah, and this is this New Age piece has been here for a good little bit now. It's really picked up as our more atheistic society has desired to remove religion as much as possible, but still have some type of inner strength that is beyond just what we can physically see in some role of empowerment. So the idea of it keeps all of the ideas and principles and teachings of Jesus, but it removes the God element. It removes essentially any type of
the mysticism
piece. No, anything that would essentially connotate to something bad or negative.
Well, no, I think it removes, the just what I think is an immaterial topic, which is just whether there is actually a true intelligent being, or what the origin of the universe is, and what the creation of it, which I think is something metaphysical that we can't really answer, and I think is kind of I'm not gonna say it's a foregone conclusion. I think it's just an unhelpful conclusion, because it doesn't help us live better lives. But the teachings of Jesus can help us live better lives. I don't think that the existence or non-existence of God in that question really helps us live a better life.
So here's why I say that the main thing of it is it's just removed any of the negative connotations associated with God.
What's the negative ones? I mean, like Old Testament stuff?
People don't like hell, for example.
Yeah.
People don't like the idea that a certain way that they're living is wrong, and they need to change that. They'd rather know that, oh, they deserve so much more. They're worth so much more. They'd rather come at it from these very positive lenses. They would hate the idea of being able to, of having to be like, what I did there was wrong, and I need to actively acknowledge that, and then I need to do what is right instead.
Which you're saying it's selfish to not believe in God, you're saying? You're saying it's just for self-improvements, because not self-improvement, for self-aggrandizement.
1,000%.
You think that it's because they're afraid to look at their own faults?
Let's take, for example, have you ever heard of Christ consciousness?
I don't know, elaborate.
So Christ consciousness is basically a set of people who believe in, they even will quote the Bible, a lot of it, but they'll say that Jesus Christ was just a person who tapped into this oneness aspect,
Well,
this aspect of God.
Isn't that something Christians agree on, that Jesus himself was a person?
Yeah. So
what's the problem?
The case that they make is that Jesus Christ, it's not that he was some unique individual. He was just the first individual to type into the Christ consciousness, which is essentially that oneness and alignment with God. So basically, it strips him of his...
So you're saying that amongst Christ consciousness, or followers of that, you're saying that they believe in God, but they don't think that Jesus was an avatar of him?
Yeah, basically. They believe that he just figured it out. That he figured it out, and that we could all figure it out. And there's a sect of people who can essentially, they get this scroll, and when one person with the scroll meets another, and they read this person their scroll, it activates them. And once a person becomes activated, they are now in alignment with Christ consciousness in the same way that Jesus was.
Is the scroll the Bible? What is a scroll?
It's like it's like an activation button. It's like you now hold the scroll. You're now in alignment with God. You can now collapse time frames. You can now essentially.
So it's like the Tesseract in the MCU.
Exactly.
Wow, powerful stuff, guys.
And so that's why I say, like. And there's not even an idea that suffering is something that holds value. It's a belief that instead of looking at things as suffering, you should instead look at things as you are loving yourself in this way, and by loving yourself in this way, this is you being able to strengthen past a moment that inevitably you will end up growing from.
Yeah, and I think that that has its origins in Stoicism, and especially like Epictetus, like the concepts of if you allow yourself if you allow yourself to be made weak by circumstances beyond your control, conditions dealt to you by fate, right? Then you are not skilled in the art of life. I mean, if you need to take the weaknesses you have, right? Look through those, and then use them to the best of your ability, and then you are a good person in that case. I mean, you have to. I mean, and I'm not, I know you mentioned last time we were together that that's like for my autoimmune disease is like it's a glorious representation or something of God on earth or something. But for me, I think that there is value in the challenge. There's value in having weaknesses, having ailments, because you do become stronger through them, And I think people who have had no adversity in life, I mean, you can see them, you can talk to them, and you can tell that they're just kind of drifting on a cloud, and there's not really there's not a lot of weight to what they say and what they feel, and I don't really relate to people like that very much, And so I relate to people who have been through stuff, and so I absolutely think there's value in that, and I think that a lot of the teachings of Christianity, all right, are either sourced involved from, or related to in some way the teachings of the Stoics, and that's why I think there's some common ground between what I believe and what Christians believe. I find it's in those common veins with the Stoics, and yeah, so I would put it in that lens, and I think that so in terms of like the Christ consciousness thing, I think.
And remember, like, we don't have to debate that because it was just to point to how
we're changing the goalposts.
The idea of Jesus being an atheist.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. So I didn't really cover that. Really, I mean, basically, the theory is that when Jesus, as a human, is left alone on the cross without God, the Father with him, then at that point he feels the human desperation, our loneliness, and our lack of real connection. Like if you talk to God, unless you're actually crazy, you're not going to hear his voice talk back to you, right? I mean, what you're going to feel back is an intuition, a gut feeling that what you're doing is right or wrong or whatever, right? I mean, I hope all you religious folks listening are not actually hearing the voice of God talking to you, because then you should see a psychiatrist. But if you feel it in yourself, that I think is valid and powerful, all right? And that is your intuition. Wherever you think it comes from, if you reach out and you feel something back, and it feels right to you, then you should go with that feeling, absolutely. But if Jesus is alone on the cross, if he has no one calling back to him, then he, at that point, he's not believing in religion anymore. God, he's alone. He's a human, all right? And he's subject to human weaknesses.
The entire idea hinges on the idea that either Jesus is alone or Jesus believes he's alone.
Well, it believes that he's human, right? And that there's no connection now. He can't be saved at this point from God, right? Until after the resurrection, of course, right? And becomes immaterial at that point. But I think that when he is resurrected and becomes immaterial, becomes part of the universe again, or returns to the godlike figure or whatever. People are gonna have to explain this. I'm not a theologist, as you can clearly see, but I'm trying to rationalize this from my own atheistic perspective. All right, when he ceases to be after the resurrection, I think at that point he becomes a part of everything, a part of the oneness between humans. And I think that is a beautiful thing that I can support, right? Because there is something greater to our connections, something greater to being human than just being a fly or other animal. And people might dismiss that and say, oh, wow, pigs have big brains. They're smart too. But I'm sorry, humans are different. Humans are special. And there's value to that. So that's all I'd say about that. I don't want to talk about religion the whole time, because for me, it's a small part of my life. It's kind of like how sexuality is such a big part of many people's lives these days. It's not for me.
I'll put a bow on Jesus is atheist, and I would just say that
bow on it because it's complete. It's a complete thought.
So the entire thing hinges on God leaving him and on him believing that God left him, and I would say that. It's a faulty premise, because if that is literally part of the entire plan, like literally you can look at several different points in Jesus' ministry, and you can also look at prophecy. And in all of these ways, in the book of Isaiah, and in several books leading up to the actual crucifixion, it says he will be pierced through, and he will bleed out for those that believe in him.
Okay,
so this was something that God always intended for Jesus. So how would he have left him if he always intended this, and he always intended to bring him back up? It's
okay. I wouldn't say that he left him, but the transformation of God into a human as Jesus, and then the kind of dissipation of that energy into the universe again, I think was part of the whole plan. Because at that point, God leaves humans. All right, it leaves them behind and leaves them now with the objective of you have to stick together. You have to be the best you can be. You have to have virtue.
Well, that's another faulty piece right there, because he never left them behind. One, his body was there, but two, once he.
But why do you think of leaving him behind as a negative connotation? Because for you, I remember you mentioned something.
Well, because it's just factually inaccurate.
Factually inaccurate. What are the facts?
The facts is.
Wait. Let's ask God. Hey, God, are you still here?
The facts is.
Wait.
Once
he didn't say anything.
Once Jesus got baptized himself,
all right, he
made it to where people could now have the Holy Spirit. So because the Holy Spirit is God, it was always around. So Jesus could have been dead for 3 days. Mm-hmm. There were other people that still had the Holy Spirit. When Jesus rose up, went back into heaven, the Holy Spirit was still there. So God was still with them from that time.
So what is God doing now? How is he interacting with the world? What part does he play in people's lives today since the resurrection?
You have massive amounts of alcoholics who completely change their lives around and improve, leave behind their addictions forever. So you've got people coming out of pornography addictions.
Okay, so you're saying that he made them do that. It wasn't through their own intuition, through connecting with other humans that told them, that gave them a path, out of addiction. It was just because he just said, all right, flip the switch. You're no longer addicted.
No, it's because God did what he exactly says he would do. He partnered with people, and he used a combination of his word, and he used good people in order to affect the other people and be good witnesses to them And because there were good witnesses that were doing their job well, these people were able to get a combination of God's teachings and witness and say, beyond all of these decades of me suffering from this affliction, I am now like, I've seen it, I've seen people, and I've also read it that said this is how these people got there. And this person was here before, and because they followed this thing, it ended me up there as well. And they say, I am now going to also do that. But if it was just the people, because addicts know all kinds of non-addicted people who are good people. So why was it that it took Alcohol Anonymous is the biggest reason, the biggest method of how people actually come out of it?
Why? Because it uses Stoic principles of the dichotomy of control, all right, which is viewed through the Christian lens as a serenity prayer, all right? All right?
No.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, all right.
No.
I change the things you can, all right? Don't worry about the things you can't change, and have the wisdom to know the difference. All right, this comes from the Stoic dichotomy of control. Right, so you put all your efforts towards the things you have power to change. Right, and put no efforts, no energy towards the things that you cannot. All right, and that is step one, not step one, but that is foundational to AA. All right,
so where is the Stoics version of AA then?
I mean, it's just the Christianity is just the predominating kind of force in the United States and the Western world today.
But is there not a branch of it though?
There's just not a popular like Stoic organization of people these days that is going to be putting.
Is it possible that it doesn't exist because there's not enough there that would actually lead to
the principle of the movement is founded in Stoicism, Devahntau.
So where's the Stoic, the pure Stoic version?
Because Stoics don't exist anymore. All right, they only exist in a reflection of a bunch of macho men, pretending that they're doing Stoicism, but all they're doing is repressing their emotions. But that's not what it is. Stoicism is an ancient philosophy. It doesn't. There's not Stoic churches. It's not how it works.
So Stoicism couldn't survive, but Christianity could survive.
Christianity survived because it was a business. All right, because it was the continuation of the Roman Empire.
Was it the business of people martyring themselves in order for the continuation?
It was a business of profits. It was a business of indulgences, Devahntau. Right. All right. It was 2,000 years of tremendous profiteering.
I don't think
upon
you have any
faith.
Documentation to be able to accurately.
It's the Catholic Church, all right? It's St. Peter's. Have you seen the gold, the marble, the brilliance of it, right? That was made from money of the faithful, all right? 2,000 years. I'm not saying they exploited them entirely. Many people were exploited, but there is great value, like I said, in faith. But the reason why Christianity, all right, is still extremely popular today is because Constantine converted Rome to Christianity and took the great power of the Roman Empire and the great wealth of it and applied it to Christian faith and gave it that influence that it then continued to spread over the world. And it's a great message, all right? And it's very easily proselytizable because it has great principles behind it. It's very easy to spread.
Weren't you saying that it was like a royal gladiator who was known from the Augusta, the case of the Augusta?
What are you talking about?
And the Marcus Aurelius, and like the story of that, him being a gladiator and like the society he was in, wasn't that a place where Stoicism was also like a predominant idea?
No, not at all.
So where was Stoicism at its peak at?
There never really was a peak. There were a few Stoic philosophers in ancient Greece, and then there were a handful who practiced it in Rome as well. But it was never like a predominating force in any kind of society. I mean, there's been isolated thinkers who have then whose teachings have been carried over through the centuries, but there's never been like, oh, these people were Stoics, in this city or something like that. It didn't really work like that. But
so if there was an influence, if Stoicism is older than Christianity, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like the actual book being established and all that jazz. So that means that at the time of Caesar could have been influenced by Stoics, or as he was, Christianity and so
well, okay, so I mean,
so why wasn't Stoicism the thing that Caesar was influenced by?
Well, was Caesar? I mean, I'm not going to go into what Caesar we're talking about here. There were hundreds of Caesars, but so
the one that matters in this.
So
context.
for one, I mean, there were many Caesars who were influenced by Stoicism, but usually, unfortunately, most of them were too crazy or inbred or ill-educated in order to really take its principles into account, like Nero, who had Seneca killed, etc. But so there were actually, I would say that in terms of, have you read the writings of Thomas Aquinas?
I have not.
So he was not an early, but like a mid-period Christian thinker who espoused many Stoic teachings and then applied them to interpretations of the Bible, which then became very popular and became foundational, especially later on in translations up to the King James Version and then in the future. And so those Stoic principles did eventually become part of the Christian theology, in no small way, and I would definitely read Thomas Aquinas for that effect. But so, okay, so what are you actually asking? So you're saying that, were the emperors of Rome influenced by Stoicism at some point?
Yeah, I guess this is...
Well, okay, one, most famously, the guy from the story, Marcus Aurelius, is the most famous as a philosopher emperor, but many of the Roman emperors were kind of crazy, were power hungry, were profit hungry. They weren't really interested in being philosophers. Marcus Aurelius is kind of a unique one in that, and he had more of an interest, and he was the last of what they called the 5 good emperors. And these were men who chose their successor. It was not a dynasty. They didn't say, like, my son will be king, even though he's fucking crazy. Sorry for the cursing. But they chose their successor. They were men of statehood. They were men of intelligence and philosophy, and they cared about their people. And times were very good while they were emperors. Marcus Aurelius was the last one. He dedicated his time to studying the Stoics, especially Epictetus, who actually was born a slave and grew up as a slave. And so it's not just a philosophy of kings; it's a philosophy of common people, and it can pervade through all walks of life. But he was unique in following Stoic principles. There's never been a widespread Stoic, like religious, even though it's not a religion, movements. All right, it's been a few thinkers through history that have thought particularly rationally.
But it can be religious, right? Like there's a Stoic God that exists, but people just choose not to indulge in it, right?
It's not in the form of a religion, even though it's called a god. But what you're talking about, it is something that we talked about last episode, was the Stoic physics, and the Stoic physics was kind of a way of understanding the world through the lens of there is a omnipresent spirit among all things in the world. They called the substance of it the pneuma, which is kind of like an energy force kind of thing, and this is all very Star Wars and shit, but midi-chlorians, etc. But God, what they called the Logos, which it connects to. Jesus is called the Logos, of course, in Christianity. The word, it just means the word in ancient Greek. But so. Basically, there is an element of God, but it's really as a definition of the things that's the natural way of the world that cannot be controlled and can only be understood and you can only try to live in accordance with it. All right, there's no concept of idolizing or praying to or believing in some God. The idea is that you observe the world, all right, in its natural states, and you act in the accordance with that in the best way possible, and not in a sense that you allow yourself to be overcome by your animalistic desires, because that is actually unnatural to the Stoics. What's natural, all right, is doing virtuous behaviors that then produce a much better outcome for you and for the people around you, because the oneness of the people around you, your also your duty as a human to the collective, to the community, to the state is something valuable, right? And so it's duty-based ethics. Right, and you can apply it to a lot of good and bad things. But if you're trying to be a better person, right, and your ambitions are whole and not terrible, then it can lead to good things. But also, that same sort of detachment can lead to terrible things. Heinrich Himmler famously carried around a copy of the Indian Bhagavad Gita with him in his pocket because he used the message of the Bhagavad Gita, which is to detach yourself from your emotions. He used this in order to give propaganda to the SS to tell them to allow them to keep themselves detached from the terrible murders and crimes that they're committing, and allow them to still remain whole and be able to love their families and try and be good Germans, I guess, without actually, falling victim to, without connecting yourself to the actions you're doing. Like if you go every day and you press a button that massacres, hundreds and hundreds of people, if you shoot people in the head on a daily basis, how do you do that without going insane? But they did it through religious teachings, right? And so religion can be used for good and bad ends like that, and people are naturally kind of neutral, but you can use religion to turn people very good or very bad, but always through the guise of telling them to be good, right? Hitler and the Nazis did not imagine that they were bad people.
You said you have what 12:30 is your out time?
Are we about hitting that? Oh my God, we've been talking for a while.
Well, it's 12:04 right now.
How angry? Just give me like a 0 to 10. How angry are the comments? No, just be honest. How much do people hate me right now?
Nah, you're doing good.
They hate it. They hate it.
Okay, so there were. I know you wanted to. We have a couple of options since we're running out of time here.
We can do another 20, 25 minutes, something like that.
All right, so let's. I'll lob it up to you. We can do Jesus as a communist. We can do something culture war.
Jesus. Well, I'd say I'm done with Jesus.
We could do something culture war, or we can do something something men's topic related. What are you feeling?
I mean, we can do culture war, man. I'm not afraid of that. I mean, men's topic. I mean, it's I'm not sure if I have anything really profound to say about that. I mean, but I don't have anything profound to say about the culture war either. But let's try it out. What kind of culture war are we talking?
Let's see here. I guess probably the most recent incident I can think of that I saw something was there was a woman who was fencing and in a tournament, and she knew that her next opponent was a trans woman.
Yeah.
And so this girl, she took a knee, and when the judge came over, she said, "I will not be going against this person. This person is a man, and I am a woman, and I will not fence against this man." Mm-hmm. And then the trans woman came over and said, "Hey, just to let you know, like the judge has already, I know him, and he supports me being here. And if we don't fence, you're going to get black carded." And the person said, "Yes, I understand, and I have much love and much respect for you, but I'm a woman and you are a man, and I will not fence you."
Yeah.
And she was black carded. Mm-hmm. So most recent incident that's been big. What do you think on it?
Well, I don't know the story, so I can't comment on it specifically, but I am personally not in favor of trans people, competing in the sports of their chosen gender. I think that's the integrity of the game competitively is paramount.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
If we make good on this time, I do have a race thing of culture war that we can get into. So if we spend 10 or less minutes on this, we can get to that one as well.
Okay, cool. Oh yeah, all right. So we'll do it quickly then. But so I think that the integrity of the game is important. I think that should matter above all factors of emotion or self-expression. And so in sports, I think that there's a reason why we separate the genders. I think that's that it makes it a more valuable game and a fairer game for both genders. And I do say both. I don't say 2 out of the 10,000 or something like that. I mean, I don't want to offend anybody in that sense. For me, this is just entirely rational about the integrity of the game. I understand the feeling. I understand more than many people would the feeling of being trapped in a body that you don't think is yours and you don't align with, because my body wants to hurt me all the time. And so believe me, if I could change my body to where I want it to be, that would be great.
That's really the fact that you point that out, that you are a person that has this body with all of these different ailments to where you can't have like, what is it like? Probably 70% of the average things like caffeine.
Yeah, everything hurts me. Everything food, everything people enjoy kind of hurts me, So
when people have this thing, this body dysmorphia in this significant way, or in this gender dysphoria specifically, you have an ability to speak to that in a way that, in terms of a body that you don't align with and don't like. How have you made peace with the fact that this is my body that I must deal with?
Well, again, it goes back to Stoicism, Devahntau, but no, I'm not gonna harp on that anymore. But it's about accepting things you can't change, and obviously with modern medical science, we're thinking, okay, maybe we can change some things we couldn't change before, and me, I'm taking some medications. I'm trying to change my body the way I'd like it to be, so I don't live as restrictive of a life as I have before, and so better living through chemistry, as they say. But so for me, I have it leads me to two different conclusions about it, which is why I don't have a definitive saying on whether or not I support transgenderism. Because again, for one, I embrace human progress. I want us to evolve, as far as we can past our origins to something greater. And I do, again, like I said, I understand the feeling that you are stuck in a body that is not the body that aligns with where you want to be as a person, what's in your head. So I understand feeling trapped in a body. But I also think that cutting off perfectly good genitalia is, especially before like a significant amount of testing to make sure that's really what you want to do, I think it's a little rash. And also, I'm a little jealous. Maybe give me that genitalia because mine doesn't work. All right. I think that we're heading into this very quickly without examining the ramifications of it, deeply. All right. And it has ramifications for the future of the human race, right? And I'm not saying that it's something that we should completely have off the table. There are people with absolutely legitimate gender dysphoria. It is a real thing. It is a psychological phenomenon. It needs to be examined. And some people absolutely would benefit from some sort of adjustment, to suit how they feel inside. But in terms of sports are there to find among equal starting points the best among a group of people, all right? And obviously there's some luck involved there, but generally we want to find the most skilled competitor, all right, and the strongest, the fastest among an equal, and we agree on whatever that equal starting point is, whether it's a weight class like in wrestling, or what's another example of an equal starting point, like say to a level in the playing field besides a weight class.
Besides weight class,
besides gender is the main one. So we say so. I mean, again, and for some reason it's a controversial statement, but it's not really. I mean, there is a difference in the average physical power and strength between men and women. Right? So obviously, there's stronger women.
I watched something recently. It was fit chicks. This was like women who were like at the peak of their health, exercise 6 times a week, all of that, and then it was literally versus average Joes.
Yeah.
Guys that like they showed up, they didn't even realize that they were there for like an exercise related video.
And what happened?
They just knew that there was food involved. There were
guys show up anywhere, yeah.
There were like 3 events that they went and they did, and these were all basically strength related events.
Okay.
The guys crushed the fit chicks. Average dudes, totally unremarkable in terms of their physical capacities and abilities.
Yeah.
Destroyed, decimated, dominated these fit chicks who were at the pinnacle of physical. One example is like there was like a sumo wrestling match where they had to use pads to try to knock each other out.
Yeah,
dudes destroyed them.
Oh. Well, I can't speak to that specifically. I think that there is definitely a truth to that to some extent. I mean, the military tested for many, many years on whether they could incorporate women to combat troops. They generally found that it was weakening the units in order to do that. Recently, they have started to incorporate women in large numbers. Whether or not that's primarily for diversity factors, it's hard to say. But I will say that obviously there are women who are stronger than many men. That is absolutely true, and there are men who are weaker than many.
I would
women.
say there are
but on average,
many women stronger than many weak men. I don't think your average strong woman is stronger than your average man.
Well, no, the average, that's what I'm saying. On average, men are stronger than women, all right? So we can agree on that. I mean, obviously, there are outliers in every case, all right? So that just is an exception that proves the rule, all right? And I don't really have any statistics on it either way, but we know generally men are stronger than women. But obviously, there's no difference in mental acuity or capacity, all right? But...
Well, I would probably give the edge actually to women on average to mental acuity-wise.
There's definitely some factors there. I can't speak to it, in terms of actual science, but I think there's definitely some mental strengths that women have that men do not, and vice versa. But in terms of the physical playing field of a sport, all right, there's a reason why we separate men and women, all right? And when you start crossing that line, you are losing the integrity of the game to support one person's self-expression, but not really. You're not supporting one person's self-expression. You're supporting an ideology that has pervaded our culture and has all of a sudden really way outgrown the feelings of any individual people. And many transgender people, and I'm not going to speak for them, but I've seen cases of many transgender people who don't feel like, say, the LGBT movement really speaks for them, or like they have anything particularly in common with the general LGBT movements, or that they don't want transgender people participating in sports either. I mean, because we're talking about a wide variety of people with a wide variety of feelings about things. They're not all going to be like, we want to completely, switch genders and have a co-ed sports agreement. Not everyone thinks that, especially not every transgender person thinks that. But you are compromising the integrity of that game when you have, especially, what was the name of the swimmer?
Oh, I
What's
know.
his name?
Next to Lake and Riley, Leah Thompson.
Leah Thomas. I'm not gonna.
Thomas.
You put it on here. I don't recall. I don't recall their name. And I'm not.
We're
going
alive.
To,
There's no effects here.
There's no effects here. I'm sorry, but imagine that it's there, not that. But so yeah. So and again, I'm speaking to this anecdotally. I don't know the entire facts of the situation. However, I believe he was. My apologies. She was scoring relatively low in their leagues when they were practicing sports among men, and then when they transferred to the female leagues, all of a sudden they were topping stuff out and they were winning medals, right? And it's not because they are inherently better than the women who are competing in the female leagues, but they are massively bigger and stronger. And in some cases, you're just watching a man beat up a bunch of poor women who are very talented and who would otherwise be excelling in their fields. And, I'm sorry, it's just not fair. And the reason why we do this is for fairness and equity, at least, not equality, but equity. And we create equity through this singular binary division that allowed us to create a degree of fairness in sports and has done that for centuries. That division has been happening. And so we're moving into a new world. We're changing many things, but we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Mm-hmm. And you do not have to eliminate every single aspect of the past in order to create a brave new world. All right. So you can learn lessons from the past, and you can learn lessons from things you do. And there's a reason why after many, many thousands of years, people do things the way they do. And sometimes they make sense. Sometimes they don't. And we can change things where they don't make sense, but have a conversation about it and don't throw out everything just because you want to change the world. Mm-hmm. You can't change the world every bit at a time.
Absolutely not. So let's go ahead and go over to the race piece of it now. So recently, there were two 17-year-olds at a sporting event, and there were teams separated, and each person underneath the tent was supposed to be with the team. So one player is supposed to be with his team, and he goes to the tent, and there's a student there, and the student is someone that is unrecognized by this student. He says, "Hey, man, I think you're in the wrong tent. You got to leave." So he tells him this, and they get into an altercation that ends with the 17-year-old student that was told to leave stabbing the confronter in the chest.
Oh, I know. I've seen this story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think of everything that you've seen? The father has come out. He said that he has already forgiven the young man that did it. He said that...
he forgave the man who stabbed his son?
Mm-hmm.
Or wait, the father of the guy who was stabbed forgave the guy who stabbed him?
Yeah.
Are you going to support this because of a Christian perspective? I mean, what's you going to support the forgiveness? What are you thinking?
Oh, I don't have to support it because of the Christian perspective.
Well, so like
he named it because he is Christian, and his God would want him to do that. So it's already built into the story.
Yeah.
W Christians, right?
Okay, so yeah. Well, I mean, it's I think that forgiving the person who kills you, I think, is also a Stoic idea in some sense. I mean, like that. And accepting the fact that you aren't, that person is you are complicit in the act just as much as that person is, and also that the events that they're creating is kind of out of both your control in any sense, and you can't deal with the situation. You can only deal with the consequences of it, in that sense. But what are you asking on the macro scale of this? Like, what is...
So
it wasn't a racially, directed crime. Maybe you're asking.
Yes, there are some people who are saying that this is some type of big differential. First of all, to note, like the father has explicitly said, like, I don't want this to become like a political talking point, and the internet has just taken to it just as the internet does, of course, but. I guess, do you think that there's a racial component in there? Do you think that this is something that the family has said that, this student right here, I guess maybe there had been previous altercations between them.
Yeah.
And that this was this student being at like his last straw if something happened. There's all kinds of questions involved with why was he in a school function with a knife? How it would, if there was previous altercations that they had, and let's say he knew that this student was on a tent, does that mean that he came there with the knife ready, waiting for a moment to be antagonized so he could finally do it? That's one version of it. The other version is that this was a kid. I haven't really heard the argument of why he had the knife in his bag, but they're saying that, oh, he had gotten bullied before previously by this same student.
Yeah.
And every person has a right to defend themselves.
Well, I mean, stabbing someone is, I don't know if you call it self-defense, especially if, if they weren't like trying to hurt you in that moment. But I don't know the story. I've heard it, just in passing tangentially. I don't really know the details of it. So I'm not going to comment on the details of the story. I will say that
let's do ifs, ands. So let's say if the student had been previously bullied by this person, what and this was this person's like self-defense mechanism against them.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that I'm not going to argue the points of the case itself, but I will say that the motives behind it, we can talk about those. Like, say, I mean, is it racist every time anyone does anything negative to a person who looks differently than them, right? Or does it actually have to have an undertone of feeling like you're superior to that person? I mean, for me, I think that racism, that term is thrown around just as much, if not probably like way more so than fascism, Nazi, things like that. I think people will they will endeavor to call anything racist that's any kind of interaction between people of different races that they view negatively, and that's just not the case. I mean, people stab people for all sorts of reasons, that are not tied to race. I mean, people say bad things to other people, they're not tied to race. But there are cultural, socioeconomic factors that play into.
Ben, you disagree with my religion, you're racist.
Exactly, right. Just because I'm white, it's racist because I disagree with you. That some people would say that, and that's the kind of insanity it makes it difficult to engage in discourse with people these days.
Well, they wouldn't say it about my religion, but if you disagree with like Islam, they would.
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is that there are many people who would look at our conversation today, and if I was to ask you a difficult question, or if I was to say you're wrong about something, people would claim that to be racist just because you're white and I'm black. I said you're white and I'm black. I just said that, guys.
Dang, Ben, when did that happen?
It's changed, man. It's 2025.
Is this part of that whole body dysmorphia thing?
That's
for
right.
you?
You see this part? I'm like 1% black. Anyways. All right. So, anyways, back to what I was saying there before that flub there. But I don't know where we were. Okay. So basically, I think that we should not throw the term racism around ever where it shouldn't be, because I think it cheapens actual racism, and I think it really just diverts the topic to somewhere unhelpful. But. I mean, do we know whether the black guy who stabbed the white guy had racist feelings in his heart when he did it? I think there was probably an element of that, because anytime there are extreme emotions, all right, and extreme emotions, maybe they were sourced in something else, maybe it was the bullying, something else like that. It is going to be seen through a racial lens, especially in the United States, when it's seen through people of two different skin colors, and there is a racial element that pervades many different emotions, and people will get racist, and they try and it's a way for them to kind of view their other irrational kind of feelings about things, through a lens. It's like, oh, it makes so much sense that this guy did this because he's black. It's like,
that was the immediate response of Matt Walsh. Yeah. Matt Walsh said, it's time that we finally have the conversation where we talk about the fact that young black men have a tendency to lean towards violence. Kind of going right back to that thread of what we were discussing earlier, kind of leaning into that kind of.
If we look at crime statistics, you can't avoid that. They're just proportionally high crime, but there are factors that explain that, and it is not because of their skin, it's because of the factors of their upbringing, cultural factors, socioeconomic factors, right? It's not because of like a weird different size of their brain or something like that, there are real reasons why these things happen, and that's why it's so dangerous to look at statistics and you say, oh wow, 13% 15% of the population commits 52% of violent crime. And you hear that, you think, wow, I'm going to be a racist now. But, and it's a very easy thing to hear that and all of a sudden say, okay, well, I can just explain the entire world based through this one little factor of race. And all of a sudden that just makes everything simpler for me. And, you know, most people don't have the time or the energy to really examine these issues in depth. And so they just look at it through an easy lens of it's because he's black or whatever, you know, and it's really, it's a destructive argument, but it's so easy for most people to fall into that. But there's a lot of factors that come into play. And I do think that if a black guy stabbed a white guy, there was probably some element of racism in there. Whether or not it was the main factor, we don't know. And I think that if there was bullying in there as well, that may have been a factor as well. I mean, but really, young men are extremely volatile. No matter what they look like, they have their hormones are going crazy. Teenagers, they are ready to fucking punch. I'm sorry to curse, but they're ready to punch everything and fight everything and sexually assault everything because their hormones are screaming everywhere, you know. And so they're extreme, and that's why most of these shooters are young people, all right, and most attacks and most violence is committed by young people, and, you know, because it's their emotions are running high, and that can lead to some really dark places, especially if it's reinforced with ideas that maybe that explain bad behavior and give it a lens like racism again, you know. So I think it is a factor, but I think there's many factors. The issue that you get, people, when you actually look into most issues is that they are not easily answered, and that absolutely everything can be explained through any point of view with a certain level of with a certain number of arguments and a certain amount of statistics behind your back. Do not trust everything you read. Learn everything that you can and make your own decisions about things, because everything you read is subject to bias and subject, you know, to different interpretations, you know. So it makes it tough, you know. But Devahntau, I got to head out here.
Indeed, our time window has come up here.
Oh, but it's been so nice. It's been a good talk.
It has, man.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's been good. I'm glad I came here, and yeah, you know, I like your podcast. I like your setup. I think this is really this setup is really conducive to good talks. I feel like, you know, I mean, I wasn't sure when I came in, but I came in. I sit down here. At first, this donut thing I'm sitting on made me doubt at first, like. So this is actually it's a donut chair for chronic prostatitis. And I come in here and I see this and I'm like, wow, did you prepare this for me or something?
Most people,
you know?
can't even spell that.
Unlikely. Yeah. Most of my diseases they have people probably can't spell, but that's okay. No one needs to read Latin anymore, you know. But yeah, Devahntau, it's been fantastic. I'm glad to be here. And it's been a great experience. And I'm excited to see the results. And I'm excited to see all the hate in the comments, you know. But yeah, man.
I'm sure there'll be zero of it, you know.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I see some stuff there. You know, there's a lot of words. You know,
sure.
Some negative, some positive, probably.
Well, my man, let's go ahead. We'll get you out of here. For those of y'all that have been watching, thank you so much. Whether you popped in, came in, stayed for most of it, or are watching this on the back end, I've been your host, Devahntau Colonel. This has been Ben Markham with Benny's Big Talk. Make sure to go check out his stuff. And we'll see you guys next time on the next episode of the Inspired Challenge Podcast. Take care. Guys.